button. Everybody hit got it. All right, welcome to the Merging Technology Call. We have a guest today, Todd Eckard from Geisinger, who's joining us today. We're taking through us a cloud topic as he's responsible for a lot of the technical and security aspects of that migration for his organization. He has a lot of perspective to give to us. And cloud computing, therefore, healthcare was a little scary. So I think about 5 years ago or so, you asked someone to, are you porting to the cloud? And they would say, oh no, or are you running applications to the cloud? Oh no. But services at the cloud have become more robust. In fact, so robust that's actually hard to replicate on premise for many organizations. And so the movement to the cloud has been more accepted. So what we'll do today, Todd, we'll do a short presentation on the cloud, and then we'll open it up to share our experiences. And some of you may have already ported to the cloud. So coming back to Todd, you may have some advice for him, or you may have some concerns about your environment. So I want this to be very interactive after the presentation. Todd, I'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Ed. Great introduction. I'm Todd Eckard, and I'm wondering if I can share my screen, Ed. Do I have the properties to do that?
Sam, do you have that capability?
I gave him co-host, so he should be able to share his screen. I've given you all the power that I can give.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Not yet. Now, did you? No, assume you have to press that share button. It's like an extra step. There you go.
There we go.
Okay, let me move this down. Technology, it's great when it works, right? Okay, everyone can see that, right?
And it says Todd has started sharing the screen, except nothing is showing. You might want to select the right screen or something.
That may be an issue because I'm actually sharing my screen right now.
Do you want to send the PowerPoint to me?
Sure. Sorry about this.
Oh, no worries. That's what we call high.
Okay. Well, good morning. As Ed asked me to introduce myself, I apologize for the technical difficulties. I am Todd Eckard. I'm the Senior Director for Information Technology here at Geisinger. My passion and drive has always been technical IT compliance, security, and
why is that?
We need 200.
Can everybody go on mute for us, please, if you're not speaking? Todd, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Can we go back to the last screen? Sorry about that. Thank you. As I was saying, my drive and passion in my career has been, privacy, information security, and compliance. I've worked for Geisinger for the last 25 years, and I've always had a love for risk management. And this cloud thing is new, right? It's new to all of us. It's certainly new to Geisinger, and I want to be able to share some of my thoughts around what we've experienced. Now, I will preface this that we have not fully transitioned into the cloud, so we're still in progress of that, but wanted to share with all of you some of the things that we're learning. And first of all, some strategical components on the screen right now. I would recommend considering, if you haven't done this yet, considering a cloud migration partner, because look, at the end of the day, none of us knows everything about it. It's as Ed started the meeting and introduced, it's kind of a new thing, right? Some of you may have already transferred there. For us, we're in process of doing that. For other companies in healthcare settings, they haven't even started this process yet, but would highly recommend considering a cloud migration partner to help with this, so it reduces or eliminates your rework. The second thing I want to point out from a strategical component is transitioning in waves or phases. So depending on how many applications, systems, and what kind of infrastructure you have built, you're going to want to make sure that you're breaking this down in manageable chunks, right? Not taking everything over at the same time. And this is all part of the readiness plan that that we've put together here. What do you mean by phases and waves? Well, I mean, do you want to take a risk-based approach? Take your higher, more critical systems and applications over first to get them done, or do you want to do more of the low-hanging fruit, the smaller applications with less users, and get those done? So make sure that there's a wave or phase transition plan. From a risk framework and remediation plan, certainly want to have a risk framework in place. If you're using a risk framework already, and I'll touch on this in the checklist in a couple slides, but if you're using a risk framework, that's probably fine. The key here is to make sure that your risks are identified before transferring over and transitioning to the cloud, and that there are remediation plans in place to take care of those risks. Some of those risks you may deem higher than others, and you'd want to mitigate or remediate those risks before going over, and others you may be able to accept or acknowledge that risk and take care of them after the fact, after they've been transitioned. The fourth point is to document and over-communicate a readiness plan. This one's, believe it or not, one of the most important, right? Because you've got lots of stakeholders. You've got, your IT shop, you've got your security shop, you've got your privacy shop, you've got your users, your employees, your users, you've got your patients or your customers that you have to think about. So all of those stakeholders from the C-suite all the way down and outward, I can't stress enough. Communicate the readiness plan so that all are engaged and all are on board, so that as you march forward, there's no surprises. And last, before you do it, make sure that all colleagues are embracing that cloud ecosystem. Make sure that you've got everyone on board, and that readiness plan that's been communicated has already been signed off or authorized by your C-suite or your leadership, so that everyone says, well, move to the cloud, that's the next best thing. But it doesn't work if not everyone's on board and isn't agreeing to that approach. Next slide, Ed, please. So I'm going to present this in kind of a checklist format. These aren't really the steps necessarily that you would take in order, but it's meant to be more of a checklist of things that you may want to consider, things that we've learned, that we're considering and still working through as we go through this process. First, a holistic inventory review, making sure that what your hardware, your software, and lastly, your data is, those internal and external data transmissions, how they work. Some folks were pretty heavy on, as we've learned this, it was all about hardware. You're going from the physical servers in your data center environments to the virtual servers, and then over to the cloud. But don't forget about the software and the applications and all of those bolt-on and modules, and even the databases. Application RAT strategy. So this is a big one. You're not going to want to transition things that you're not going to keep. And so if you're looking to decommission a system, whether it is because you don't use it anymore, or whether it is it's part of your rationalization strategy, because in Geisinger's instance, we have many systems, we have many applications, we have lots of infrastructure, and so we had to put an app RAT strategy in to make sure that apps that aren't needed any longer are decommissioned, and we save the money on that. App functionality, what functionality can be combined? If you have, I'll just use a very loose and easy example. If your company's using 10 survey tools, why do you need 10 survey tools to go to the cloud? One may be it, or maybe you don't need any of them to go to the cloud, and you just use something that's offered out there that's already in the cloud, right? what systems already exist with like or same functionality. Can they be pared down? For Geisinger, we use Epic, so there's a lot of paring down we could do that the Epic suite of products allows for us. And so that application rationalization strategy is huge because, like I said, you're not going to want to transfer things over that you're not going to use anymore or that can be combined. It's going to lead to bigger costs for the organization. Contract reviews. Are there vendor contracts that absolutely prohibit transition to cloud environments? So we've run across this, believe it or not. We've had some level of contracts, not many, but some that stipulated, hey, look, we're not interested. We don't want to move the software to the cloud. We're not going to let you move the software to the cloud. And so if you're going to continue using this, it's got to stay on-prem or on-premises, hosted by Geisinger or hosted by your institution. And so we've run into this a couple of times, and it's good that we've done that contract review so that we can work with those vendors. If there is no other functionality out there, if there's no other vendor that offers, quite what that application offers you, you may be stuck. You may have to use that application and that technology and not be able to move somewhere else. So that's a consideration. A second consideration, contract reviews. What are the hidden costs? What are the fees or the clauses that might exist to you moving the apps to the cloud? So those are two things that, if for nothing. Hello?
Oh, sorry, Todd. Sam has raised his hand, so I thought might be a nice place to take in a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Hi. Just real quickly, you mentioned Epic. Have you moved any of your Epic databases into the cloud? And if so, I realize everybody's not Epic, so they probably don't care about it. Maybe we could have an offline discussion with some people about, because we've made the decision not to move any of our Epic work to the cloud for the time being.
So Sam, that's a great question. That's a huge one for us, right? Probably our biggest system, and we are moving some of like the preliminary things, I'd say, into a test environment right now. So the answer is no. Has it been fully transitioned to the cloud? No. But are we testing some of that? Yes. And I'm happy, to maybe take that offline, Sam, and get a smaller group and maybe talk with you guys about that a little more. Sure.
Yeah, that would be great. I think that we could collaborate. It's not my area, but I know the people that are responsible for it.
No, that'd be awesome. I'd welcome that. Okay. Decommission process. So like the application rationalization strategy, for those systems that are leaving, you're going to want a decommission process. That's not just simply going into the data center and flipping the switch and taking that server offline. I know, it may seem like that, but you're going to want to think about your contracts. You're going to want to think about the data that's been sent or those tunnels that you've opened up. You're going to want to think about, do you need that data back from your vendors or your third parties? So you have this application that you're no longer going to use in the cloud. How are you getting that data back? How are you turning everything off? It's not just the physical hardware that you have to think about or the software. There are surround processes that you're going to want to think about before you decommission that. And once it's decommissioned, making sure that it is off in the data center and making sure that everything's sanitized before everything is totally wiped and out of the environment. The next three are hugely important: access control, change management, and security vulnerabilities and patching. And I would say, what we're finding out is you kind of have to get this right before you move it over to the cloud. So access control management, aside from your processes, you're going to want to think about doing an access recertification exercise. And basically, that is making sure that you go back and for each of your apps that you have access that you've granted access to, making sure that those users still need that access. This is a great time from an auditing standpoint to go back through and take out the accesses that are no longer needed. If they don't need transitioned, don't do it. It's extra work and it's extra risk. From a change management strategy standpoint, you're going to want to think about testing from both sides, right? So at Geisinger, we do all kinds of testing, but it's important that the IT pieces get tested of this. So the actual transition, the technical pieces, moving from your physical environment, from your data center into that cloud environment, no matter what cloud provider you're using, making sure the technical items are taken care of, but also UAT, and that's just short for user acceptance testing. You're going to want your stakeholders, you're going to want your users and the business involved in your testing to make sure that they're looking at everything and that they're agreeing to, the changes that are being made, so that when that system is transferred, there's no surprises when you get it over there. Everything's been tested. The appropriate parties have signed off on that, and it can be cleanly transitioned over to the cloud. The last thing under change management I want to hit on is vendor-driven changes. If the system isn't yours, but you're still in agreement with the vendor, and the vendor's in agreement with you that it's going to be transitioned to your cloud environment, you're going to want to have the vendor get in and do their change management processes, because especially if they're doing the changes to the system, you're going to want some sort of documentation or some sort of attestation that they've done those changes, they've done the testing, and that everything's copacetic before you move that to the environment. The last one on here, and then I'll pause, Ed, and maybe we can take some questions if folks have them, is security vulnerabilities and patching. Making sure that, I know you're all sitting there probably thinking, well, we've got lots of vulnerabilities, or maybe you don't. But if you do, maybe now's not the time to mitigate the low risk vulnerabilities, but I can say without a doubt that it's a great time to mitigate your critical or your higher risk vulnerabilities. If you have them, those that are, 15-day vulnerabilities or 30-day vulnerabilities, or even up to 60-day vulnerabilities, those that you deem critical or important, making sure those patches are in place so that when this transitions over, you've got a clean slate and you don't have to worry about patching your environment. That's already been taken care of, and you can move that over to the new environment, to the cloud. And like I say there, strive for clean slate environment prior to migration, because it's just all the more work. And quite frankly, you may not know how that's going to operate over into the cloud until it gets there. And then, you're going to want to think about revert or backout plans, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide. But access control, change management, security vulnerabilities, and patching are hugely important in the process and should be on your checklist when you're going through it. Now, Ed, I'll shut up for a second, and I can't see the screen. So if there's people with their hands raised, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're doing awesome, Todd. I love the checklist. Sam, is his hand raised again?
Yeah, I don't see on here business recovery, so considerations, disaster recovery. Are you going to talk about that later on, or?
I sure am.
Okay.
Yep. That's next slide.
Thanks.
Sure.
All right. Any other questions from the audience? I have one for you, Todd.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we hear all these different advances of cloud services and all these different services that they're offering. It's not just there's application services, there's security services, there's performance services. I'm curious if you can summarize or at least point out some of the cool ones that you're utilizing for your migration.
Yeah, so so the actual application services that you're talking about, I mean, I can absolutely send this group a list, but I'm not prepared today to touch on those, Ed.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah,
but I'm certainly happy to give the whole work group a list of what we're using, but I don't want to quote them wrong.
Okay, sure. Is there any that you've been surprised that were just like, wow, this is really cool to have on the cloud?
You mean from our applications that we transitioned?
Oh, no, sorry. The services that your cloud provider provides.
To be honest, not yet.
Okay.
We're not there yet. We're still in the beginning stages of doing this.
Okay.
And, you know, we're still kind of in the learning process, but, you know, the readiness plan is really, you know, really what I was prepared to talk about. So I'm sorry, I
Oh,
don't
that's
have
okay.
an answer to that one.
That's okay, Todd. I tend to be nerdy, so I ask those kind of questions.
It's okay.
Sam has
Now,
his.
if you're to ask me that answer, or if you'd ask me that question here in September, October, I'll probably have a list for you.
All right, we'll wait for that. Sam has his hand raised again.
Yeah, do you, at this point, have you just moved actual storage, data storage to the cloud, or have you actually moved physical server access as well? So in other words, have you decommissioned your own local hardware to move that component of the cloud environment yet?
Yes, Sam. So there have been a couple that we've decommissioned physical servers. I think there's like 7 of them that we've moved over so far that are up and operating, and that includes the data storage too. So yeah, there are like 7 that we don't have the physical servers anymore, and we've gone through the process to decommission those.
Okay, so do you have service level agreements with the cloud vendor in terms of performance? I see you have access control here, which is one of the big challenges that we have. You know, we found that the cloud vendors are not allowing the level of access that our internal tech folks are saying that they need, you know, to do configurations and other services. And the reason that they give is because, you know, there are certain things that they won't relinquish because it could affect other clients.
Yeah, so I would say the answer is yes. We have SLAs in place, but those SLAs were kind of a partnership between us and the vendors of those applications that we moved over, right? We didn't want to really set SLAs that couldn't be met by the vendor during transition, and then new SLAs with the cloud service provider themselves have been established, along with some OLAs internally. So we do follow that. We do have SLAs set up. If you want more details, certainly happy to include that in the conversation we're going to have offline.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep. Okay, Ed, other questions?
No, I don't see any. We'll kind of facilitate some discussions afterwards, but I'll go to the next slide. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Here we go.
So I think this is Sam was asking about disaster recovery plans. So from a disaster recovery, let's touch on, you know, this left column all has to do with, I call it contingency. So when I look at contingency planning, you know, there's you've got your disaster recovery or your IT plans. How are you going to actually recover the system and the hardware or the software, right? Then there's the business continuity. How is the business going to keep going if they don't have that system any longer? And then the other 2 pieces are, you know, which really don't come into play here, are the facilities. You know, you have your systems, you have your business continuity, and you have your users, right? But you don't have the facilities to run anything. And then the last arm of that is you might have your systems, you have your facilities, and you have your backup processes. Everything's running, but it's the pandemic, right? You don't have enough staff, or you don't have the correct staff in place. But for the cloud transition, disaster recovery plans, you're going to want to make sure everything's updated. It's important if you've been operating under the guise of not really having a disaster recovery plan for each of your applications. That's one recommendation that I would say, you know, is strong. At Geisinger, we have a business resiliency program that incorporates all of the above. So there's application plans, there's infrastructure plans, there's backups, but from a disaster recovery plan, you know, one of the recommendations we do is before it gets transitioned over, you're going to want to make sure that plan is tested and that it's working. first and foremost, to make sure that if anything needs updated in that plan, you do it at that time. And then you transition over once that test has happened, for one final time. We found that before we've transitioned over the first two systems, that our DR plans needed updated. And so even though we have a process in place to update them via risk-based criticality, we did need to update those plans basically because some of the contacts weren't the same, or maybe some of the servers were misnamed and those new servers weren't included in there. And so that's something that when you have a ton of applications that you do DR on, it's not something that you keep up to date every day, especially if you're keeping documentation for each system. From a data backup perspective, you're going to want to consider backup frequency. Does that need updated? So if you're only backing up, and most probably back up nightly now, right? Or they back up real time. But if that has to be changed, some of our smaller applications, we don't do that to save space. So if those things need to be changed, you're going to want to consider that frequency. You're going to want to make sure that the data backups that you do, that you run that backup plan, so that if you were expecting 3,547 records before you back up, and you do your backup and the output is 3,260, you have some checking to do. And so you want to make sure that they sync up and that the records sync and that the backups are also, the final point of the backup plan is to make sure that they're capturing all the necessary information that you needed to capture. So checking those and making sure that it's capturing everything needed is an exercise that you're going to want to consider. And then from a business continuity plan perspective, this is where if something goes awry and the system becomes unavailable during transition or before transition or after transition, you're going to want to make sure that your business has the appropriate plans in place to operate. From a healthcare perspective, that means patient life. That means member eligibility status for health plan, for Geisinger health plan. And so from that standpoint, we have to make sure that our operations staff are in sync with us and making sure that they have documented plans and probably even down to the paper plan. So where if we lost one of our systems during transition, they can still run appointments, they can still see patients, they can still operate via paper processes if they need them. And if we're using another system to carry out some of the functionality, what system is that? And is that system available there to switch over to? And so considering tabletop exercises to make sure that those business continuity plans are updated and that everything's in place before transition. And then lastly, on the left side, documentation, ensuring all internal policies, procedures, and workflows are reviewed and amended. So the documentation piece, has to, you have to consider not only your controls from an auditing standpoint and not only your frameworks, but what it's going to look like, what your policies are going to look like once they're transitioned, that your systems and your data is transitioned over to the cloud. Maybe your control structure gets a little tighter because you've relinquished the reins of control to your cloud provider, right? So maybe your control structures get a little stringent or get a little more stringent, but it's important that documentation is updated to reflect both the on-prem and cloud environments. And Ed, I'll stop there before I cover the last three.
Hey, any questions for Todd?
I assume that you put the items that are in the first section on disaster recovery, the test documented plan, that actually is a physical test.
Yes.
Okay.
Any others? Okay, back to you, Todd.
Great. And then the last three on the checklist, are elevated privileges. This kind of goes with access control, but it's important, right? So those are admins in IT, those people that we say, have the keys to the kingdom, that control the environment, that control the application, that control the flow of the data, making sure that there's a way, because you know what? Through all of this, I'm sure internal and external auditors will be around, especially for Geisinger, to check us out, to make sure that the project plans and the readiness plans and the risk assessments that we've done, met the framework. It met the level of control that we needed. So I threw elevated privileges on here to make sure that those accesses and those I'll say elevated authorizations are checked, right? So if you have super users that should or shouldn't have access to that new environment, you're going to want to make that decision sooner rather than later so that those folks can be properly trained, or I'll say offboarded out of the admin role, right? Because roles are changing. You may have some folks that were admins for some systems switching over to other systems. You may have folks that are admins for systems that are transitioning that are no longer admins. And so those types of things should be considered. The other thing under there is the remote access that might be enabled for the network and or application. And that includes, offshore access. You're going to want to make sure that's tested and that access before transitioning, we have a plan to keep that in sync when that's transitioned. And, in an audit, those elevated privileges are the first things that, an auditor will look at, and they're going to look at your control framework for that. Audit logs. This is something that, a lot of people have systems that monitor audit logs, and they'll send them alerts to when they see something going wrong. But you're going to want to monitor those audit logs. And I don't mean manually sit down and look at every line of code, but if there are alerts, making sure that they're turned on so that if something does go awry or those elevated privileges aren't taken out, or if something goes bad with the system, those audit logs can evidence that. And then if there are variances to those audit logs, they're reported to the system owner or whoever you call, the ownership. At Geisinger, we call them data managers and data custodians. The data managers are on the business side. They're responsible for the data in the application and making sure that folks have the correct access, right? They do the approvals. From the technical side, they're data custodians. They're responsible for the technical pieces of the application and the systems and the infrastructure. And they're responsible for making sure that the system in transition to the cloud, all those technical pieces are getting tick and tied before we go. And then last but not least, if you don't have control frameworks, I've just put a couple on here for you to consider. Definitely we follow the ITIL technology. We're moving to a NIST moderate level framework. Some folks are high trust, some folks are ISO 27000. At the very least, if you're a smaller shop, that's fine. And you're sitting there saying, wow, I don't have a control framework in place. You can home grow one. You can look at doing self audits and quality assurance reviews, or what we call total quality management, TQM stops, to make sure that folks are, there are hard stops in your processes to make sure that those controls are in place and being validated. And those frameworks, I'm not necessarily saying you have to go out and buy the most expensive framework and put in 1 million controls, because we all know that brings overhead too, and the risk versus benefit has to be taken into consideration through all of this. But having a best practice or a control framework in place as you're doing this is going to help mature your security and your risk posture, so that you don't have so much to think about once it's up in the cloud. You have all of that kind of established and working before it gets to the cloud. Ed, I think that's it. I'm not sure if we have a closing slide or not. Yeah.
You said thank you, Todd. Your last slide.
I said thank you. Yeah. So I feel like that was rushed, and it wasn't meant to be rushed. it was meant to be, as good a content as I could give you. But during the presentation, in 15 minutes that I didn't keep to that. So I apologize for that.
Oh, that's okay. Gosh, we still have enough time to talk, and it wasn't. Hopefully, all who attended are finding this a great playbook. If you haven't migrated yet to the cloud or getting ready to move an application to the cloud, as a great reminder of some of the steps that you have to take. What I'd like to do, Todd, is just kind of facilitate some discussions. So I'd like to see if anyone would like to share their experiences with their migration to the cloud and their experiences there. And just raise your hand if you'd like to share, and don't be shy. We're all friends here.
Hi, this is Gina Park. I have a question for Todd. What was the impetus to move to the cloud? Because we know that payers are very risk averse and it's a very costly multi-year endeavor. What was Geisinger's, what was who pushed it, I guess I'd say, and to buy the commitment and also the funds for it?
Yeah, great question. The impotence, I would say, came from our top leadership down from the C-suite. We were looking, being an innovative healthcare system, we're looking at how we can cut costs, right? Because the costs are great from COVID all the way up. We were looking at cutting costs, and for us, some of it was, Gina, actually that application rationalization, right? We had this, I'll say, I don't want to say bloated, but asset list that was that's been kind of out of control. Like, we've had a huge appetite for, getting this application and getting that application. And for us, we found that moving to the cloud will help us cut the costs of the support for application. And after the 3 to 5 years, we would be experiencing, some sort of a profit from moving that way. And so some of it was, hey, that's the way we're moving. We can find cost savings in doing that. And especially, maybe from a staffing standpoint or administrative cost, but certainly from a system and software cost. Some of those software that we've just had around forever, right? We don't need to keep those anymore. Moving them or moving to the cloud will help us, I'll say, decommission or lighten the load from our application support. So we're looking at cost savings from not only, the technical and software and contractual, but administrative costs too. So it's not like we said, hey, that's the next best thing to do. Let's move everything to the cloud. There was certainly a lot that went into that deciding factor. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And on one of the previous slides, or I guess one of the first slides, you mentioned about what type of approach, whether you go for based on critical priority for the applications or the low-hanging fruit. What did Geisinger do, and what has been the experience so far?
So not going through this before, it's such a, I'll say, it's kind of like throwing the cards up in the air, right? That's and seeing what sticks. So we actually took a model of doing a low risk, a moderate risk, and a high, I'm saying risk, but I'll say high priority system. So we've taken an organizationally prioritized system like Epic. We've taken a more moderate system that may have some risks to it, and then a system that's really pretty deferrable. And so we've started moving all three, and so far our experience has been positive on all three. Now, I will tell you, the more organizationally prioritized, like Sam, you heard Sam mention Epic, that has a lot more fingers and that has so many more attributes to it. So there's a lot more to consider. But we didn't really say, well, we're going to move all of our low deferrable systems up to the cloud first because that's easiest. We're kind of still testing the waters on some of that because we're early on in that process. So I would say, what's best for your organization is, what you determine. Maybe it's a system with less risk, so that you don't have a huge impact, but maybe it's a system with more risk because your goal is to mitigate a lot of the risk. And this is one of your ways to mitigate it before, you go to the cloud and kill two birds with one stone. So I would say it's not a science. It's something that's probably left best for each organization and how they have their organization structured to make that call. So hopefully that answers some of the question that you were asking.
Yeah, I was just curious. And also, how many years did you all allot for this? Did you think this is going to be a 3 to 5 year, or is it longer?
Yeah, we've allotted. So we started, and this will tell you how huge the project is. I mean, we've gotten rolling the over the past year, right? And we're allotting until at least 2026. So I would say it's about a 5-year plan to get there. And that includes everything from readiness and project management until we turn the key on the last system and start our lessons learned.
Oh, wow. And I'm not sure if you can say, but did you go with Azure or AWS, and what were the pros and cons?
I wasn't that close in the decision making. I can tell you we went with AWS. I can't really speak to the decision points on why we went to one versus the other.
Yeah, and Todd, we like to be safe, not to tout one vendor or the other. So that's
Yeah. I was just curious more than anything. Okay, thank you so much for entertaining my
Yep.
peppering
Gina,
you with
thank you.
questions.
Gina, thank you for your questions. Randy, you're next.
Hey, Todd, this is great. Thank you for taking time and going through this. I didn't hear you comment much on change management, how you implemented it, what you would do differently, and how it's being sponsored as far as an executive sponsor with this whole 5-year plan. Could you expand on that, please?
Yeah, so when I commented on change management, Randy, I was talking to the actual technical change management. Is that what you're wanting to know? Not basically change management from the organization, but from the system level. So if that's what your question is, then sure, I can comment on that.
Yes, please, if you would expand on that from an IT level.
Yeah, absolutely. So Geisinger has a very I'll say rigid change management process. Okay, so for our systems, we go through. We use. Well, I won't tell you what system we use, but we use a pretty well-known system in the quadrants for change management, and we've gotten it down to pretty much automated. So some of the controls that we're using for change management is definitely, the segregation of duties, making sure things are approved, making sure that there's both testing from IT and the user standpoints, making sure that test plans, backout plans, implementation plans are in place, and really the change management process for the cloud hasn't changed a whole lot. Now, we are doing a more risk-based approach to change management for the cloud, but Randy, we're really not cutting controls, right? We're not cutting corners on that. And so changes that are going over, maybe there's an infrastructure change that we can group, right? So for all of these types of servers for this application, there's one change, and we look at that, and we would apply that across the board for those types of changes. We do follow an ITIL standard. So we do follow the standard versus the normal versus the emergent versus the informational changes from ITIL. We are not on ITIL v4 yet. We will be, but we do follow that framework. And from a change management perspective, I think you said, how do you get your executives to buy in? Well, honestly, at our level, we set the policies. The executives definitely, approve those policies, but the change management decisions are left down to those folks in the trenches, right? That know the systems, that are working with the system every day. We do have a CAB advisory or a change advisory board that we use to hear those changes. And obviously, we hear the higher risk ones first, and the more lower risk ones are taken care of in a vertical CAB, meaning they're left up to like the IT departmental units that are over those systems. And so not all changes, that's how we do some of the time savers. Not all those changes rise up to a cab. We do cab every day. And so some of these changes of the cloud, the more significant changes, and we have definitions for all of that, do rise to this level. But the process really, Randy, we're not cutting corners. We're still following the segregation of duties. We're still following, the 2 levels of approval via our data manager and our data custodian. We're still following testing from IT and UAT. We're still following the policy that we have in place. We have not, it's not like we've developed a new policy for the cloud. We're still making sure that the controls that we've put in place for our environment internally and on-prem are the controls that we're going to follow moving forward. I'm not sure if that answered your question or not.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Back to you, Sam.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to when you were talking about the business continuity. We actually have a whole program where every application, and such, the impact on the business is assessed, and there's a whole long, rigorous process that we use to determine that. So, that's critical to know whether it's, shut the lights off, kind of level, or it's something like it's a application that's used by 5 people in a remote department somewhere. That is all taken into consideration in terms of, what level of business continuity is required. Is it instantaneous failover? Is a brief interruption, acceptable? That kind of thing. So I think that that is a critical thing that, that sets the expectation of what that end user is expecting to have in the case of a failure. And frequently that we found that also runs over into, migration strategies. How do I copy an environment from, production and spin off a test environment, those kind of things as well. So, I think that's important. The other thing I wanted to say was, one of the things that we have taken into consideration in our cloud environment is what the migration and growth path is. Over the next 3 to 5 years, what's the expectation about the sizes of the databases? How rapidly are they going to grow? Do they require reorganization at any point in time? All of the aspects of the application, I think, as were referred to, are real important considerations.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed, Sam.
Yeah, it sounds like our organizations are very much on the same track. So, like we said, it's going to be good to compare notes.
Yeah, with the promise of the cloud being able to add more performance and more disk, at your request, is how's that working in your planning, Todd?
Ed, I'm sorry, you cut out a little bit.
Oh, sorry. The promise of the cloud is being able to add performance when you need it, when you add disk when you need it, and you can actually shrink it when you don't need it. How's that working with your planning?
So with the few systems that are over, Ed, so far, I would say very good. We've seen here it's let me say this, it's kind of tough at first, right? Because you have the reins, we have the reins in IT, and from an organizational standpoint, it's kind of tough giving those reins over and trusting that to a foreign environment, I'll say, right? But so far, we've not seen any degradation or anything like that. So
that's great. How about this is something we talked about before, Todd. How about your employees? Is there the impact on employees, their concerns, their buy-in? Do you have any thoughts on that?
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up. I meant to bring that up in the presentation and just talk about, the people aspect of this, right? And there is a people aspect. I'm sure all of us are fighting the great resignation, or whatever they call it, and folks, leaving for higher pay, or leaving, just from COVID standpoint, and finding the right resources. And so it's stressful, right? This is basically on top of all the other priorities that Geisinger is doing, all the other innovation. So none of that stuff, none of that work stops. All of that work keeps going, and we've got to be very, as leaders here, we've got to be very concerned from an employee engagement standpoint and burnout, life-work balance. We've got to watch that closely to make sure that our resources are not getting burnout, right? And that this is a huge project. It's not something that anyone's going to do overnight, right? And so it's a journey. It's a marathon and not a sprint. And so the toughest part, Ed, honestly, has been prioritizing, right? This is a priority of the system, but we've got 30 other priorities for Geisinger too. And so it's balancing act. It's a balancing act for all of the resources, especially IT, and making sure that, we're still giving the vacations. I think people forget about that. We're all human, and there's a people aspect to this and an HR aspect to this. And you got to make sure that your great resources that are working for you, while you want them to balance all the priorities, it's very hard, and you want to do it right. And so you got to make sure that the time off, and you got to make sure that, getting out for their appointments and things like that, that all has to be taken into consideration. And oh, by the way, if someone isn't here because they're sick, or they've got COVID, or whatever, life happens, that the appropriate backup personnel are in place, right? Because that's a very important piece of this. So I'm glad you brought that up. That people, human resource aspect is the most important, right? Because at the end of the day, if we don't have that, how's it going to be accomplished? So thanks for bringing that up.
Sure. And Todd, I loved the thorough playbook that you have, and hopefully the folks that have been attending this call will be able to leverage and learn something from that, and take it to their organization.
Great.
One of the things I like about Weedy is being able to collaborate with each other and share information, and share your challenges, and sharing your successful approaches, and hopefully folks can get that. Also, for those that people are dropping like flies, but we have a summer forum that's coming to us in August that will be live in Chicago. So check that out. It is a great place to make relationships and to share information, and we'll wear masks too, so we'll be safe. Hey guys, thank you again, Todd, for sharing all that, and thank you all for attending. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
This was great.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.